Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic library wall behind me. I skipped a day yesterday, but before that, we did an ecclesiastical author. We did the Venerable Bede. And today, we're going to skip backwards in time a few more centuries. We're going to go much closer to the classic Roman world that we've been spending so much time in. Not to confuse you, I promise, but just because my shelves aren't meticulously chronologically ordered. So this is a very personal tour through these books. It's not if I were ordering these things for a seminar or a class to, towering tiers of seating in an amphitheater, which I would love. I've done that and I've enjoyed it a great deal. Most of the times that I've done it at the behest of friends of mine who took a look at that amphitheater and were absolutely white-faced, panicked at the idea of such a thing, and said, "Could you please do this for me?" but if I were doing that, I would organize these more systematically. But I'm not. So we're going backwards in time just a bit. We're gonna bounce a few centuries back from the Venerable Bede and go to Caesarea. We're going to go to the Roman Empire when it was east and west. And our ecclesiastic today is a bishop. It's Eusebius. This is the History of the Church by Eusebius. Eusebius was a high ecclesiastic. He wasn't some monk, writing away at Jarrow. He was a well-known official who had lots of other things to do, but he was an antiquarian and he was a bookworm. And he assiduously collected documents and organized documents about the early history of the Christian faith, of the Christian church. Invaluable, in other words, since a lot of people in the 1st and 2nd century didn't think to do that. Or they did, and no trace of their work survives. And considering the absolutely seismic effect that Christianity has had on the world in the last 2,000 years, considering the fact that the world has literally been shaped into its current form by Christianity, anybody would, of course, can be excused for having a rabid curiosity about how the whole thing started, especially its crucial early days. And Eusebius is right on the spot with a lot of that stuff. That's the main value of this book, is that he wants to tell the triumphant growth and expansion, the mission of the church as carrying God's holy word on earth. And he, unlike Bede, he stays rigorously on message all throughout. He wrote enormously, just voluminously his whole life. And this book, this Penguin Classic, this translation is by G.A. Williamson. I believe we've seen him before, or her before. This is very good. It's very clear translation. But again, this is a tiny fraction. Not only of what Eusebius wrote, but of this work itself. This is a taste of Eusebius that Penguin just gives to its readers, and God bless them because nobody else does. But nevertheless, there's a lot more Eusebius out there. If for some reason somebody should want to read more of this author, unfortunately, from Steve's point of view, unlike with Bede, that will not be true with Eusebius. With Bede, I don't think you need to read much of the Venerable Bede to get the feeling that you know this person, and that you've encountered him before in your reading life, but never writing an ecclesiastical history of England, but rather as a novelist. Bede can't help it. He stays on point as much as he can. Miracle stories, improving parables and anecdotes, brief and glowing hagiographies of bishops or various church leaders. He stays on point as much as he can, but it's not much. His novelist's eye is constantly being drawn to other things, to human elements. We read one of them. But a child who is basically shown mercy and given basic hygiene and taught how to speak, and who grapples on to speak enthusiastically. That was a wonderful little moment in the Venerable Bede, and there are plenty just like that, involving children, involving animals, involving infirm old people. Anything that he noticed finds its way into his narrative, and the stories are told with such incredible warmth and insight, without necessarily God-bothering, without dragging in, the paraclete every other sentence. That doesn't happen in the Venerable Bede. You think that it would when you look at the title of his book, or when you look at the admittedly boring package that Penguin puts it in, where you've just got this stiff figure from a manuscript that is poorly colored and that is faded with age, when it would be so easy to create a cover for a collected bead that would be enticing. It would be so easy to do, but you won't notice nearly as much of that novelistic sensibility when it comes to Eusebius. Bishop Eusebius stays on point quite a bit. He takes you through the Gospels and the early church, and it's invaluable, absolutely invaluable. If you are interested in Christian history, and maybe you've looked at some of the very earliest stuff, including the Gospels themselves, and you're saying, okay, well, there's no attestation to any of this outside of the Gospels themselves, which are religious documents proclaiming that their main character is the Son of the living God and a God himself, and that the reader should worship him. So they aren't exactly objective. And if you look outside of that, there's nothing. There's nothing at all. There's no historical corroboration of any of this. And so given that, these can't be used or considered as documents of the early church. So where are those documents? How did this happen? There's no doubt at all, in my mind anyway, that the four Gospels and the Acts and the Epistles are recounting something real, that a movement happened, a phenomenon happened. It might have even centered on one individual person. I don't quite share a camp with the various people out there who claim that there was no historical Jesus. I think they make a lot of good points, a lot more good points than complacent academics would admit. But one way or another, I think it's indisputable that something happened. And in the Gospels and the Epistles and the Acts, we get a glimpse of the very threadbare and simple and almost folkloric thing itself. And then, in almost no time, Constantine is declaring it the official religion of the empire. And in almost no time, it has powerful votaries, and it's big enough to be persecuted by one emperor after another. And it's a fascinating phenomenon that we want to dig into. You want to know more about it, what the actual steps were. And Eusebius is about as close as we can come to that. He's a very calm and clear-eyed narrator, and he's interested in that subject too. Even from his own standpoint in antiquity, he still wants to know, how did this happen? He's not in any doubt as to why. The why is because God decided to make his promise to mankind manifest in the flesh. But the how still fascinates him, as I would imagine that it would, except a lot of his ecclesiastical brethren didn't seem to be interested in it at all. And as a result, this book is fascinating for that reason, but it's a totally different kind of fascination than what you get with Bede. Just to warn you ahead of time. And I wanted to give you an example of that. Since I gave you an example from Bede, I thought I'd give you an example of Eusebius so that you could see. He writes a lot about Origen, or as the President of the United States would say, oranges. He writes about Origen, a church father named Origen. It takes up a lot of space in the segment that's translated in Penguin. And I wanted to give you a taste of that, because it shows you that Eusebius never loses the thread. Almost never. This may serve as the first evidence of Origen's boyish sagacity and the perfect sincerity of his devotion to God. For already he had laid firm foundations for the understanding of the faith, with a capital F. Trained as he was from early childhood in the divine scriptures, he had toiled at these assiduously, his father insisting that in addition to the normal curriculum he should pursue the study of Holy Writ with equal vigor. He constantly urged him not to give any time to secular subjects till he had steeped himself in religious studies, and every day required him to learn passages by heart and repeat them aloud. This was not at all distasteful to the boy. Indeed, he gave himself up too completely to these tasks, and not content to read the sacred words in their simple and natural sense, looked for something more. And young as he was, he devoted himself to profounder investigation, so that he wearied his father with questions as to the meaning and intention that underlay the inspired scripture. His father would make a show of scolding him to his face, advising him not to look for anything beyond his understanding, or any meaning other than the obvious one, but in private he was delighted and profoundly grateful to God, the author of all good things, who had deemed him worthy to father such a son. Laying on a bit thick here, but we're going to press on just a bit here. It is said that often when the boy was asleep, he would bend over him and bare his breast, and as if it was the temple of divine spirit, would kiss it reverently and count himself blessed in his promising child. These stories and others like it are told of Origen as a boy. Now, you can snicker, of course. You can snicker at that, and I am guilty. I have snickered at that and passages like that myself. Eusebius was blind to the ironies and the darker imports of what he was writing. He was completely on point at all times. A story about a father who yells at his son for doing what the father tells the son to do, and frequently visits the son at night when the son is asleep, undresses him, and kisses him, has slightly different imports than the one for us than the ones that Eusebius means. He was totally blind to the snickering that such a passage would create in its readers. Instead, as you could see, is any of that believable? I don't think so. That a father would tell a small boy to learn passages by heart, and when the boy asked about them, the father reprimanded him, that the boy would be happy about that, or the father would be happy about it all. It's all so obviously retroactive rejiggering of the story. And yet Eusebius can't leave out that detail. It doesn't occur to him to leave out the detail about the father coming into his son at night and kissing his naked breast. There are I don't want to call them malapropisms, but there are blindnesses like that all throughout this book, as you will find even today in explicitly religious writing that never wanders from its focus. That ironclad focus will almost always lead a writer into absurdities of one kind or another. You have to have a broader sense in order to make this stuff beautiful or compelling, which is why professional popular theologians of the type whose self-published books I review literally every day can be so flat and so absurd in a way that, for instance, C.S. Lewis never can. Because you need a little bit broader view. It won't do you or your readers any good if you're enthusing from inside the cloister. And Eusebius is guilty of that all throughout this book. So you're going to get a lot of that, not just about Origen, but about lots of other people too, how they were infused with the Spirit of the Lord, how they were righteous beyond the realm of men, beyond the ken of sin. And I like Eusebius, of course. I nod at his incredible value in our literary history, but that gets a little old. I'm afraid to say. It gets a little old in a way that, again, never happens in Bede. And there are quite a few other writers that have, in this period that I guess we're going to be moving into, there are quite a few other writers on this subject. It was the biggest subject in the world. Of course, there are going to be people who would write about it. And there are quite a few of others who don't come off as the droning pedant that Eusebius is. So I mean, you could hear from that translation by, who is this again? G.A. Williamson. You could hear from that translation that this is Williamson gives it a kind of old-fashioned cadence. I'd be willing to bet that Penguin would never bother to commission another translation of Eusebius. It'll be this one. It'll be nothing at your bookstore, I would bet. That cadence can have its own rewards. If you like that, there's plenty of it here. I just want to... I recommend the translation. I commend Penguin for making a Eusebius volume. I don't know if they do anymore. I once again haven't checked. But I commend them for once upon a time having put this in the metal spinner rack at bookstores on train platforms for busy commuters. That is great. Absolutely great. As to actually recommending the book as a reading experience, well, we're going to have hits and misses on this March of the Penguins, right? We're going to have hits and misses. These are classics. I can't live without them for a various number of reasons. But they aren't all going to be recommends for that, for your free time reading. And I'm afraid this isn't one. This isn't one. Much like Josephus, I would say that this is a book better read about than read, unless you're directly interested in the subject. There are plenty of people who are directly interested in the early history of Christianity. How did this start? How did it grow? And how did the people who were there at the time think about it? Well, there you go. You've got a motherlode here. But if that is not a subject that interests you, then I don't know that this book will carry you very far. We'll see if we have... That's your Penguin for today. We'll see if we have better luck tomorrow. So I will wrap up and see you then. Thank you, Book 2.